I have witnessed catastrophic decisions before. In my 73 cycles serving the Galactic Council, I have seen entire star systems lost over clerical errors, trade agreements that accidentally legalized piracy, and one particularly memorable incident where a translation glitch turned a peace offering into a declaration of war. That one resulted in 3 moons being vaporized. So when I say that what I am about to describe was the worst decision in recent galactic history, understand that I am speaking with experience. It started, as most disasters do, with a meeting that should have been routine. My name is Vico, mid-level diplomatic aide to the Council's mediation division, which, translated into simpler terms, means I stand behind important beings, nod when they nod, and occasionally prevent interstellar conflict by ensuring no one is served a beverage at the wrong temperature. You would be surprised how many wars begin that way. On that particular cycle, I was assigned to assist with a territorial dispute in the Outer Rim. A familiar situation. Predictable. Boring even. The kind of conflict that gets resolved with long speeches, longer documents, and everyone leaving mildly dissatisfied but alive. The opposing party, however, was not known for leaving things alive. The Yalan Empire had laid claim to 3 colony worlds in Sector 98, worlds that very much did not belong to them. Their justification was based on a treaty so old and so poorly documented that even our archives flagged it as questionable fiction. Naturally, they responded to this legal ambiguity by deploying a warfleet. Because of course they did. The colonies in question were lightly defended, populated mostly by agricultural settlers and trade workers. They had neither the ships nor the weapons to resist a full-scale occupation, which meant the Council had exactly 2 options. Intervene militarily and risk escalation, or attempt diplomacy and hope the Yalan Empire felt unusually reasonable. We chose diplomacy. This was not the first time. In fact, it was the 5th attempt in just 3 solar cycles. Each time, the outcome had been the same: delays, threats, minor concessions, and the inevitable return of Yalan warships a few months later. It was, in technical terms, a complete waste of time. Still, protocol demanded we try again. An ambassador was selected, an experienced negotiator with a long history of successful treaties, a reputation for patience, and a voice capable of talking even the most aggressive species into submission through sheer persistence. And then, 2 days before departure, he died. A meteor strike. Direct impact on his shuttle. No survivors. Statistically improbable. Deeply inconvenient. Panic followed, as it tends to do when your only qualified diplomat is suddenly reduced to debris scattered across low orbit. The Council needed a replacement immediately, someone with credentials, someone expendable enough to risk, and ideally someone the Yalan Empire would not immediately devour upon arrival. That last requirement proved challenging. Several candidates declined. A few pretended their communication devices were malfunctioning. One fainted. Which brings us to the moment everything went wrong. Because in their infinite wisdom, the Galactic Council decided to accept a volunteer. Not from one of the established member species. Not from a recognized diplomatic corps. But from a species that, until recently, had been considered little more than a curiosity. A species with 1 planet. No significant military presence. No notable biological advantages. And a long, well-documented history of making completely irrational decisions. Humans. Specifically, 1 human. A diplomat named Marcus Vale. At the time, this decision was met with confusion, skepticism, and in one memorable case, uncontrollable laughter. I will admit, I laughed too. Because if there is one thing the entire galaxy agreed on back then, it was this. Humans were harmless, fragile, short-lived. A species that had somehow survived on a death world despite possessing none of the traits typically required for survival. They had no claws, no scales, no natural armor, no venom, no enhanced strength, nothing. And yet, for reasons no one could adequately explain, they kept inserting themselves into situations far beyond their capabilities. They negotiated. They traded. They persisted. It was almost admirable. In the way one might admire a small creature attempting to stand its ground against a predator 10 times its size. You do not expect it to win. You simply respect the effort. So when Marcus Vale volunteered to negotiate with the Yalan Empire, we assumed we were sending him to his death. What we did not realize, what none of us realized, was that this decision, this absurd, reckless, completely illogical decision, was not the beginning of a disaster. It was the beginning of a revelation. And by the time it was over, the entire galaxy would have to reconsider everything it thought it knew about humanity. To understand why sending a human was considered a joke, you need to understand how power works in the galaxy. Because out here, strength is not a matter of opinion. It is visible, measurable, undeniable. Every species that earns a seat at the Galactic Council does so through one of three things: military dominance, economic control, or biological superiority. Preferably all three. The Venet Collective, my people, earned our place through diplomacy and administration. We are not the strongest, nor the most dangerous, but we are organized, efficient, rational. When others want to fight, we make them sign documents instead. It has worked surprisingly well. Then there are species like the Krello Dominion. They earn their seat by conquering everything within reach. 8 limbs, natural armor, and a reproductive cycle that turns small conflicts into full-scale invasions within weeks. Their idea of negotiation is simple: you agree, or you are removed. Permanently. The Theraxian Guild took a different approach. They built relentlessly. Entire star systems reshaped into production hubs, their technology so advanced that even their civilian vessels are capable of outmatching most military fleets. They do not threaten. They simply outproduce you until resistance becomes mathematically pointless. And then there was the Yalan Empire. They were, in many ways, the purest expression of power the galaxy had to offer. 7 feet tall on average. Covered in dense, scale-like plating capable of deflecting most standard plasma fire. Clawed, fanged, and built for direct confrontation in a way that made even the Krello pause before engaging them. They valued strength above all else. Not metaphorical strength. Not political strength. Physical dominance. If you could defeat them, they respected you. If you could not, you were beneath them. Often literally, and usually briefly. Their empire spanned over 40 systems and continued to expand with predictable aggression. They did not hide their intentions. They did not pretend at diplomacy beyond what was required to avoid unified retaliation. They took what they wanted, and they kept it. The only reason they had not already ignited a full galactic war was because even they understood the consequences of pushing too far, too fast. Which is why the Council existed. A delicate balance of power. Strong species checking other strong species. Conflicts contained through negotiation instead of annihilation. It was not perfect, but it worked. Most of the time. And then there were humans. The humanity had entered the galactic stage roughly 40 standard years ago. Their arrival had not been dramatic. No massive fleets. No grand declarations. Just a single, somewhat unstable vessel emerging from a poorly calculated jump and immediately requesting trade access. Their technology was functional. Their ships were serviceable. Their understanding of interstellar politics was non-existent. They applied for council membership within their first year. They were rejected within the first hour. Not out of malice, but because by every known metric, they did not qualify. They had one inhabited planet, Earth. No interstellar colonies. No military capable of defending against even a minor incursion. No biological advantages worth noting. In fact, by most evolutionary standards, they were remarkably fragile. They lacked natural weapons. Their skin offered minimal protection. Their strength, speed, and durability were all below average when compared to most council species. And yet, they had originated from what we classified as a death world. A planet with unstable climates, predatory ecosystems, widespread natural disasters, and enough environmental hazards to discourage the development of intelligent life altogether. By all logical models, a species like humanity should not have survived long enough to invent basic tools. let alone achieve spaceflight. This contradiction puzzled many of our analysts. Some theorized that humans were simply lucky. Others suggested they had benefited from an unusually stable evolutionary window. A few argued that we were underestimating them. Those voices were largely ignored. Because when you looked at humans, really looked at them, it was difficult to feel threatened. They were small, so unimpressive. They smiled frequently, even in situations where smiling seemed inappropriate. They valued cooperation over dominance, negotiation over conquest, persistence over efficiency. It was an unusual combination of traits, almost contradictory, and completely non-threatening. They established trade routes, built minor outposts, integrated themselves into existing systems without disrupting the balance of power. If anything, they were considered useful, adaptable, friendly, to the kind of species you kept around because they made things easier, not harder. Which is why, when the Council selected a human to mediate a dispute with the Yalan Empire, it felt less like a strategic decision, and more like an administrative error. Because in a galaxy where power is defined by strength, where dominance is measured in fleets, weapons, and the ability to destroy your enemies before they destroy you, sending a human into a room with apex predators was not diplomacy. It was sacrifice. A quiet one, polite, bureaucratically justified, but a sacrifice nonetheless. That is what we believed. At the time, what we failed to understand, what the entire Council failed to understand, was that we had been measuring strength incorrectly. We looked at claws, armor, and firepower, and completely overlooked something far more dangerous. Something far more unpredictable. Something that did not fit neatly into any of our models. Humans were not strong in the ways we recognized. Which meant we never bothered to ask the more important question. What if strength wasn't what made them dangerous? The official designation was Emergency Mediation Deployment, which, translated from Council terminology, meant we are out of options and hoping this works. The situation in Sector 98 had deteriorated rapidly. The Yalan Empire had moved beyond threats and posturing. Their war fleet, 12 capital ships, supported by dozens of smaller vessels, had taken full orbital positions above the 3 disputed colony worlds. They had issued a final demand. Surrender within 72 standard hours. Or face planetary sterilization. Not invasion. Not occupation. Sterilization. A message not just to the colonies, but to the entire Council. The colonists, predictably, refused. Mostly because they had nowhere else to go. These were not military outposts or wealthy trade hubs. They were farming settlements. Generations of work poured into terraforming hostile environments into something barely livable. Uprooting them was not an option. So they stayed, and waited, and hoped the Council would do something. We were, unfortunately, still deciding what that something should be. Military intervention was discussed. Briefly, then discarded. The Yalan Empire were aggressive, but they were not stupid. Their fleet position had been chosen carefully. Any attempt to engage them directly would draw in neighboring systems, escalate the conflict, and very likely ignite a multi-sector war. No one wanted that. Not after the last one. Diplomacy, then. A final attempt to resolve the situation without bloodshed. Under normal circumstances, this would have been handled by a senior ambassador with decades of experience negotiating with hostile species. Under normal circumstances, we would not have been improvising. The emergency session was called in a secondary briefing chamber. Our primary one was still sealed after an unfortunate incident involving a Sluggoth delegation and a disagreement over seating arrangements. The room was crowded. Council members, military advisors, strategic analysts, all speaking at once, all offering solutions that, upon closer inspection, were not solutions at all. We delay them. They won't be delayed. We threaten sanctions. They don't care. We mobilize a partial fleet. They will interpret that as aggression. Back and forth. Endlessly. Predictably. Uselessly. I remained near the rear of the chamber, as was appropriate for someone of my rank, recording notes that would inevitably be archived and forgotten. Until one question cut through the noise. Who do we send? Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. The heavy kind. Because everyone in that room knew the answer. No one wanted the assignment. Negotiating with the Yalan Empire under normal circumstances was already dangerous. Doing so while they were actively preparing to destroy 3 inhabited worlds was closer to suicide. Names were suggested. Quietly. Carefully. Each one dismissed almost immediately. Unavailable. Already deployed. Declined. Refused. One particularly respected ambassador had reportedly responded to the request by transmitting a single message, no, which, given his usual tendency toward excessive politeness, was considered unusually emphatic. Time, unfortunately, was not on our side. The 72-hour deadline was already halfway elapsed. We needed someone. Immediately. That was when the doors opened. No dramatic entrance. No announcement. Just a quiet interruption as a figure stepped into the chamber, glanced around, and then walked forward with a level of calm that felt out of place. At first, I did not recognize him, which, in hindsight, should have been my first warning. He was smaller than most of the beings in the room. Noticeably so. No natural armor. No visible augmentations. No ceremonial markings indicating status or rank. Just simple clothing and a small rectangular device held loosely in one hand. A human. The murmurs started almost instantly. Confusion. Disbelief. Annoyance. Who authorized this? What is it doing here? This is not the time. He ignored all of it. Walked straight to the center of the room. Waited. Not impatiently. Not nervously. Just waited. Eventually, High Counselor Mira focused her attention on him. You are not scheduled to be present, she said, her mandibles clicking softly with restrained irritation. I know, he replied. His voice was steady. Entirely unbothered. I'm here to volunteer. That was the moment the room shifted from confusion to something closer to disbelief. You, one of the military advisors said, not even attempting to hide the skepticism. You intend to mediate with the Yalan Empire? Yes. No hesitation. No qualifiers. Just a simple answer delivered with absolute certainty. A few individuals laughed. Others exchanged glances that suggested this was some kind of misunderstanding. High Counselor Mira studied him carefully. You are aware of the situation, she said. The Yalan fleet has issued a final ultimatum. Previous negotiations have failed. Their tolerance for perceived weakness is limited. I've read the brief, the human replied. And you still believe you are qualified for this assignment? I believe, he said, that you don't have anyone better. That did not go over well. Several voices rose immediately in protest. This is absurd. We are not sending a... This is a diplomatic mission, not a... He didn't raise his voice. Didn't argue. Didn't defend himself. He simply waited again. And somehow, that made it worse. Because he didn't look uncertain, or intimidated, or even particularly concerned. He looked like someone who had already made a decision, and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. High Counselor Mira tilted her head slightly, a gesture that, among her species, indicated calculation. What is your name? She asked. Marcus Vale. Credentials. Independent diplomatic contractor. Trade negotiator. Conflict resolution specialist. The pause. References? Several, he said. None of which you're going to have time to verify before the deadline expires. A few more quiet reactions to that. Because he wasn't wrong. Time was the one resource we no longer had. You understand, Mira continued, that this assignment carries a high probability of failure. Yes. And that failure will likely result in your death. Yes. And potentially the destruction of 3 colony worlds. A slight pause. Yes. No change in tone. No visible hesitation. Just acceptance. That was the moment something shifted in the room. Not approval. Not confidence. But detention. Because fear was expected. Hesitation was expected. Even refusal would have been understandable. But this calm, almost casual acknowledgement of the situation. It didn't fit. Why? Someone asked from the side of the chamber. Why would you volunteer for this? Marcus glanced toward the speaker, then smiled. A small, almost amused expression. Because, he said, someone has to go. Silence again. Longer this time. He let it sit, then added, and I have a feeling they're more likely to listen to me than you think. That earned him a few confused looks. One outright scoff. But no one immediately dismissed him. Because, inconveniently, no one else was stepping forward. High Counselor Mira looked around the chamber, measured the room, calculated the options, or lack thereof. Finally, she spoke. Very well, she said. You will be granted provisional authority to represent the Council in this matter. A ripple of reactions spread instantly. You cannot be serious. This is reckless. This is... She silenced them with a single sharp click of her mandibles. Our alternatives are non-existent, she said flatly. Unless another candidate wishes to volunteer. No one did. Of course they didn't. Her attention returned to Marcus. You will depart within the hour, she said. You will be provided with all available intelligence on the Yalan delegation. You will attempt to secure a ceasefire or negotiated withdrawal. A brief pause. Do not fail. Marcus nodded once. Understood. No dramatic speech. No visible nerves. Just that same steady calm. As if he had just agreed to something routine. Something manageable. Something expected. As the chamber began to dissolve into hurried preparations, updated briefings, and last-minute contingency planning, I remained where I was for a moment longer. Watching him. Trying to understand what I was missing. Because there was something wrong with this picture. Something that didn't align with everything we knew about humans. They were not supposed to act like this. Not in the face of overwhelming force. Not when the odds were this bad. Not when the outcomes seemed this inevitable. And yet, Marcus Vale looked less like someone walking into a suicide mission, and more like someone walking into a problem he had already decided to solve. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Because if there is one thing I have learned in my time with the Council, it is this. The most dangerous situations are not the ones where you know you are going to fail. They are the ones where someone else is absolutely certain you won't. I expected many things when I was assigned to accompany the human diplomat. Confidence was not one of them. Panic, perhaps. Forced bravery. At the very least, visible concern. Instead, when I finally found Marcus Vale, he was sitting alone in a converted storage bay that the Council had hastily reclassified as a temporary preparation chamber. He had one leg crossed over the other. A small device, his tablet, rested in his hands. And he was reading. Not scanning urgently. Not reviewing in distress. Reading. Like someone passing time. For a moment I simply stood there watching him, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew. This was a human. A species widely regarded as physically fragile. A species about to walk into a negotiation with the Yalan Empire. A species that had, on multiple recorded occasions, consumed diplomats they found irritating. And he looked relaxed. You're Marcus Vale, I said finally, stepping into the room. He glanced up. 2 eyes. Forward-facing. Focused. There is something deeply unsettling about human eye contact. Most species evolved with lateral vision for threat detection. Humans look directly at you, as if measuring something. As if deciding something. That's me, he said, offering a small smile. You must be Vico. His tone was light. Friendly. As though we were meeting for a routine assignment instead of what was very likely a fatal one. I've been assigned as your diplomatic aide, I replied. I'll be handling coordination, documentation, and keeping me alive, he suggested. I paused. That is not officially part of my responsibilities. Shame, he said. Would have been useful. There was humor in his voice. Actual humor. I stared at him. You understand where we're going, I said. The Yalan Empire are not known for patience, subtlety, or restraint, Marcus finished. Yeah. I read the file. And, he said, setting the tablet aside and standing, it's a negotiation. I blinked. Yes, I said slowly. A negotiation with a species that has already positioned a warfleet and issued an extermination-level ultimatum. Which means they want something, he replied. They want the colonies. They say they want the colonies, Marcus corrected. That's not always the same thing. I opened my mouth to respond. Closed it again. Because I wasn't entirely sure how to argue with that. They have superior force, I said instead. They have no incentive to compromise. Everyone has an incentive, Marcus said. Sometimes you just have to figure out what it is. He moved past me, heading toward the equipment station where travel clearances and mission data were being finalized. His movements were efficient. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Just purposeful. As if every step had already been planned. Have you done this before? I asked, following him. Negotiated, he said. With hostile species. Under threat of immediate violence. He considered that for a moment. Define hostile, he said. That is not reassuring. It's not meant to be, he replied. That was the second time he had said something like that. I was beginning to suspect it was intentional. You're very calm, I said. Should I not be? You're about to walk into a room where you are physically outmatched, politically disadvantaged, and statistically unlikely to survive. Sounds like most negotiations, he said. I stopped walking. He didn't. Marcus, I said more firmly this time. This is not a trade dispute. This is not a contract disagreement. This is a species that resolves conflict through dominance displays and violence. Actually turned to face me. And for the first time, the lightness in his expression shifted, just slightly. Not gone. But, focused. I know, he said. No humor. No sarcasm. Just a simple acknowledgement. And you're still doing this? Yes. Why? He held my gaze for a second longer than was strictly comfortable. Because if I don't, he said, those people die. Simple. Direct. Uncomplicated. I had no immediate response to that. Because there wasn't one. Before I could recover, he added. And because I think I can make it work. That part concerned me more. You think? I said. I'm optimistic, he replied. That is not the same as qualified. Sometimes it is, he said. I was beginning to understand why no one else had volunteered. It wasn't just the danger. It was this mindset. This quiet certainty that didn't seem to require evidence. Do you have a plan? I asked. Yes. Would you like to share it? No. I stared at him. You expect me to assist you in a high-risk diplomatic mission without understanding your strategy? I expect you to help me keep the process running smoothly, he said. The plan part is on me. That is not how council operations work. It is today. There was no arrogance in the way he said it. No defiance. Just finality. As if the decision had already been made. As if the structure we relied on, the protocols, the procedures, the carefully layered safeguards, were optional. Temporary. I didn't like that. I didn't like it at all. You're very confident, I said. I've been told that, he replied. Confidence does not change reality. No, he agreed. But it does change how you deal with it. Before I could respond, the chamber doors opened behind us. I turned. And that was when I saw her. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Another human. Slightly taller than Marcus. Dark hair pulled back tightly. Clothing that, while not officially military, had a distinctly tactical design. Reinforced seams. Multiple compartments. Minimal excess. Functional. Efficient. Then she stepped fully into the room. And everything about my instincts started screaming. There are certain behaviors that transcend species. Posture. Movement. Awareness. The way a being occupies space. Most individuals move through an environment. She moved like she already controlled it. Her gaze swept the room once, quick, precise, taking in exits, obstacles, positions. Then settled. On Marcus. You're late, he said casually. Traffic, she replied. There was something about her voice. Controlled. Not unfriendly. But not open either. This is Vico, Marcus said, gesturing toward me. Council aide. He'll be joining us. Her eyes shifted to me. Focused. Assessing. I resisted the urge to step back. Barely. Security? I asked, because that was the only logical explanation. Something like that, Marcus said. This is Tessa Kane. I processed that. Then processed it again. You brought a bodyguard, I said. Well, Marcus replied, you did say they might try to kill me. That was not a suggestion, I said. That was a warning. Same difference. It is absolutely not the same difference. He ignored that. Of course he did. She's human, I said, turning back to Tessa. The Yalan Empire are nearly twice your size. Their scales can deflect plasma fire. Their physical strength is impressive, she said. Her tone didn't change, didn't rise, didn't challenge, just acknowledged, but not unbeatable. I blinked. I'm sorry, I said. Did you just? She'll be fine, Marcus cut in. I'm not concerned about her, I said. I'm concerned about the diplomatic implications of bringing an armed individual into a high-tension negotiation. She's not there to negotiate, Marcus said. That is exactly what concerns me. Tessa's expression didn't change, but there was the faintest hint of something in her eyes. Amusement, perhaps. Or anticipation. I wasn't sure which was worse. What exactly is her role? I asked. Marcus smiled slightly. Insurance, he said. I didn't like that answer. I didn't like any of this. Because the situation had just shifted from dangerous but structured to something far less predictable. Something that didn't follow the usual rules. And as I stood there, looking between the calm human diplomat and the silent, watchful presence of his so-called security specialist, I had the distinct and growing realization that whatever was about to happen was not going to follow protocol. The transport departed within the hour. A standard council vessel, functional, efficient, and utterly lacking in comfort. The kind of ship designed to move personnel from one crisis to another with minimal regard for anything as trivial as personal ease. Under normal circumstances, I would have appreciated its reliability. Under current circumstances, I found myself wishing for something with thicker hull plating. Or escape pods. Preferably both. The journey to the rendezvous point would take just under 6 hours. The Yalan Empire had insisted on neutral ground, a decommissioned trade station orbiting a dying star. A symbolic choice. Dramatic. Unsettling. Entirely consistent with their usual approach to intimidation. Marcus spent the first hour reviewing documents. Not frantically. Not obsessively. Just methodically. Scrolling through treaty archives, trade records, historical conflict summaries. Occasionally making notes. Occasionally pausing as if considering something beyond what was on the screen. It was almost reassuring. Almost. Because it suggested preparation. Strategy. A plan. Tessa, on the other hand, was doing something else entirely. At first, I assumed she was organizing equipment. Then I realized she was disassembling it. Piece by piece. Carefully. Deliberately. On the small table between the seats lay an arrangement of objects that, at a glance, looked like an assortment of compact tools. Metal components. Cylindrical segments. Thin, sharpened edges. Unfamiliar mechanisms. I watched as she took one of them apart with practiced precision, cleaned each piece with a cloth, then reassembled it in less time than it had taken me to process what I was seeing. She didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. Every movement was controlled. Efficient. Intentional. Was unsettling. What exactly is she doing? I asked quietly, leaning slightly toward Marcus. Maintenance, he said without looking up. On what? My peace of mind. That was not helpful. She's preparing weapons, I said. Correct. In a diplomatic transport. Also correct. That is not standard procedure. Marcus glanced up briefly. Neither is negotiating with the Yalan Empire while they're holding 3 planets hostage, he said. We're improvising. I did not like improvisation. Improvisation meant variables. Variables meant unpredictability. Unpredictability, in my experience, usually meant something was about to go very wrong. I turned my attention back to Tessa. She had moved on to another device. This one slightly larger. A compact cylinder, matte black, no visible seams. She rotated it once in her hand, pressed something along its surface, and clicked. The cylinder extended, segments sliding into place with mechanical precision until it formed a staff roughly the length of her arm. A faint hum followed. Subtle, but unmistakable. Energy. Contained. Controlled. Dangerous. She held it for a moment, testing the balance. Then, just as smoothly, collapsed it back into its compact form and secured it at her side. I stared. That is not standard equipment, I said. No, Marcus agreed. That is not even recognized equipment. Humans like to build things, he said. That can disable a Yalan? I asked. He considered that. Depends where you hit them. I did not find that reassuring. At all. Yalan physiology is highly resistant to external damage, I said. Their scales are tough, Tessa said, speaking for the first time since boarding. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was something underneath it. Not aggression, not arrogance, just certainty. They're not invulnerable. I turned to her. They are significantly more durable than your species. They're also slower, she said. Marginally. Marginally is enough. She resumed her work, as if the conversation had already reached its conclusion. I hesitated, then asked, "You've fought them before?" "No." "Then how can you be certain?" "Because it's the same principle," she said, still not looking up. "Size, armor, strength, those are advantages, not guarantees." I frowned. That is a very optimistic interpretation. It's a practical one. She finished reassembling the device in her hands and set it aside with the others. Then finally looked at me. Directly. "You're thinking about it like a comparison," she said. "Bigger versus smaller. Stronger versus weaker. That is how combat works. That's how simple combat works," she corrected. I didn't like the implication there. "And complex combat?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly. "Is about timing, positioning, leverage, mistakes." "Mistakes," I repeated. "Everyone makes them," she said. "You just have to be ready when they do." There was no bravado in her tone, no attempt to impress. She was stating a fact, a simple, unremarkable truth, which somehow made it more unsettling. "You're assuming they will make mistakes," I said. "I'm assuming they're alive," she replied. "That's usually enough." I had no immediate response to that, because there was something disturbingly logical about it. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed entirely unconcerned. "If it helps," he said, glancing up again, "she's very good at what she does." "That is precisely what I am worried about," I said. He smiled. "You'll feel better once you see it in action." "I would prefer not to see it in action," I said quickly. "That would mean something has gone wrong." "Exactly." He nodded. "Fair point." Silence settled over the cabin for a while after that, broken only by the quiet sounds of Tessa's continued maintenance and the soft hum of the ship's engines. I tried to focus on my own preparations, reviewing diplomatic protocols, emergency de-escalation strategies, contingency procedures for hostile negotiations, all of which I was increasingly certain were about to become completely irrelevant. After some time, I spoke again. "What is your plan?" I asked Marcus. He didn't look up this time. "Talk to them." "That is not a plan. It's the core of one. You are going to walk into a room with a hostile war delegation and talk to them?" "Yes." "And if that fails?" He paused, just briefly. "But that's why I brought Tessa." I exhaled slowly. "That is not a contingency," I said. "That is escalation." "Only if we use it wrong," he replied. "And how do you intend to use it?" He finally looked at me again. And for a moment, just a moment, that calm expression shifted into something sharper, more focused. We're going to give them a reason to listen, he said. Something about the way he said it, the certainty, the quiet confidence, the complete absence of doubt, sent a chill through me, because up until that point, I had assumed Marcus Vale was either overconfident, underprepared, or simply unaware of the true danger. But now I wasn't so sure, because that didn't sound like optimism. It sounded like intent, and as I looked between the calm human diplomat and the silent, methodical figure of his so-called insurance, I realized something that I probably should have understood much earlier. They were not going into this negotiation hoping things would go well. They were going in prepared for when they didn't. And suddenly, for the first time since this mission began, I wasn't just worried about what the Yalan Empire might do. I was starting to worry about what the humans would do in response. The room changes before anyone realizes it. Not physically. Nothing explodes. No alarms sound. No weapons fire. But the balance shifts. Up until now, everything has followed a predictable script. The powerful threaten. The weak negotiate. The outcome bends toward whoever has the bigger fleet, the sharper claws, the louder voice. That's how the galaxy works. That's how it has always worked. And then a human breaks the script. Vico didn't understand what he was feeling at first. It wasn't fear. He had been afraid since the moment they entered the station. It wasn't relief. Things were still seconds away from turning violent. Well, this was something else. Something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. Because for the first time since this entire disaster began, the outcome was no longer obvious. The Yalan officer lay on the ground. 7 feet of muscle, armor, and predatory dominance, reduced to stillness by a being half his size. Tessa didn't move. Her staff remained pressed against the precise point where his defenses failed, where biology betrayed strength. She wasn't straining. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't even breathing heavily. She was simply waiting. And that was the moment it clicked for Vico. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't luck. This wasn't desperation. This was control. Gorix saw it too. Vico watched the realization crawl across the Yalan commander's face like a shadow. At first, there had been amusement, then irritation, then anger. But now there was something new. Something rare. Calculation. You planned this. The words came low, slow, deliberate. Not a question. An accusation. Marcus didn't look up immediately. He finished scrolling through his tablet, tapped something, then calmly raised his eyes. Planned is a strong word, he said. Prepared feels more accurate. That single sentence hit harder than any weapon. Because preparation meant expectation. And expectation meant, you knew we would attack. A small smile. Not mocking. Not arrogant. Just certain. You're a militaristic expansionist empire facing legal defeat, Marcus said. Statistically speaking, violence was the most likely next step. Vico nearly choked. You don't say things like that to a Yalan. You don't call them predictable. You don't reduce them to statistics. That's how species go extinct. But Marcus kept going. Which is fine, he added casually. We planned for that scenario. Not she. Not my bodyguard. Vico felt something cold settle in his core. Because suddenly, the roles flipped. The Yalans weren't dealing with a fragile diplomat protected by a dangerous guard. They were dealing with a coordinated system. One that had already accounted for their behavior. Gorix's tail lashed once behind him, a subtle motion, but heavy with restrained violence. You come into my presence, he said slowly, anticipate an attack, and bring a weapon disguised as a person. Tessa didn't react. Didn't blink. Didn't shift. But Vico noticed something important. She adjusted her stance, just slightly. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Optimal. Marcus leaned back in his chair. If I had brought a weapon, he said, you would have taken offense. The pause. So I brought a professional instead. Silence. Heavy. The kind of silence where entire wars decide whether they're about to start. Vico realized something terrifying. This wasn't improvisation. Marcus wasn't reacting. He was executing a plan. And the worst part? It was working. The other Yalans weren't laughing anymore. Their posture had changed. Their focus sharpened. Their instincts, predatory, ruthless, ancient, were telling them something was wrong. Very wrong. Because predators recognize danger, even when it comes in unfamiliar forms. The officer on the ground shifted slightly. Just enough to test the situation. Tessa's staff hummed, barely louder, but unmistakably ready. He froze instantly. Gorix noticed. Of course he noticed. A leader like him didn't miss details like that. Which meant he understood exactly what was happening. Not dominance. Not intimidation. Control through precision. You embarrass my officer, Gorix said. Marcus shrugged lightly. Your officer embarrassed himself. Vico almost passed out. There are moments in history where everything hinges on a single sentence. This was one of them. Because now it wasn't about territory, or treaties, or negotiations. Now it was about pride. Gorix took one step forward. The entire room tensed. Even the air felt tighter. You stand in front of me, he growled, and insult my command structure. Marcus didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't even glance at Tessa. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He nodded. Yes. Vico's vision tunneled. This is it. This is where we die. But Marcus wasn't done. Because if your command structure sends officers who attack during negotiations, he continued calmly, then it deserves criticism. The audacity. The absolute insanity. And yet, no one moved. Because the equation had changed. Before, the Yalans had overwhelming physical dominance. But they had uncertainty. And uncertainty is the one thing predators hate more than resistance. Gorix stared at Marcus. Unblinking. Measuring. Slowly he leaned back. The tension didn't disappear. But it shifted. From imminent violence. To something else. Interest. You are either very brave, Gorix said, or very foolish. Marcus smiled faintly. I've found those are often the same thing. The pause. A low rumble. Not anger. Not quite. Amusement. Gorix turned slightly, gesturing toward the table. Continue, he said. Vico blinked. Twice. What? Tessa stepped back. Not fully relaxing, but easing just enough. The officer scrambled to his feet, humiliated but alive. And more importantly, silent. Marcus tapped his tablet. Excellent, he said. Now, as I was explaining, your legal claim is fundamentally flawed. And just like that, the negotiation resumed. But everything was different now. Because the illusion had shattered. Humans weren't weak. They weren't prey. They weren't harmless. They were something far more dangerous. They were unpredictable. And in a galaxy built on power hierarchies, intimidation, and predictable outcomes, that made them the most dangerous species of all. The room changes before anyone realizes it. Not physically. Nothing explodes. No alarms sound. No weapons fire. But the balance shifts. Up until now, everything has followed a predictable script. The powerful threaten. The weak negotiate. The outcome bends toward whoever has the bigger fleet, the sharper claws, the louder voice. That's how the galaxy works. That's how it has always worked. And then a human breaks the script. Vico didn't understand what he was feeling at first. It wasn't fear. He had been afraid since the moment they entered the station. It wasn't relief. Things were still seconds away from turning violent. Oh, this was something else. Something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. Because for the first time since this entire disaster began, the outcome was no longer obvious. The Yalan officer lay on the ground. 7 feet of muscle, armor, and predatory dominance, reduced to stillness by a being half his size. Tessa didn't move. Her staff remained pressed against the precise point where his defenses failed, where biology betrayed strength. She wasn't straining. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't even breathing heavily. She was simply waiting. And that was the moment it clicked for Vico. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't luck. This wasn't desperation. This was control. Gorix saw it too. Vico watched the realization crawl across the Yalan commander's face like a shadow. At first, There had been amusement, then irritation, then anger. But now there was something new, something rare. Calculation. You planned this. The words came low, slow, deliberate. Not a question. An accusation. Marcus didn't look up immediately. He finished scrolling through his tablet, tapped something, then calmly raised his eyes. Planned is a strong word, he said. Prepared feels more accurate. That single sentence hit harder than any weapon. Because preparation meant expectation. And expectation meant, you knew we would attack. A small smile. Not mocking. Not arrogant. Just certain. You're a militaristic expansionist empire facing legal defeat, Marcus said. Statistically speaking, violence was the most likely next step. Vico nearly choked. You don't say things like that to a Yalan. You don't call them predictable. You don't reduce them to statistics. That's how species go extinct. But Marcus kept going. Which is fine, he added casually. We planned for that scenario. Not she. Not my bodyguard. Vico felt something cold settle in his core. Because suddenly, the roles flipped. The Yalans weren't dealing with a fragile diplomat protected by a dangerous guard. They were dealing with a coordinated system. One that had already accounted for their behavior. Gorix's tail lashed once behind him, a subtle motion, but heavy with restrained violence. You come into my presence, he said slowly, anticipate an attack, and bring a weapon disguised as a person. Tessa didn't react. Didn't blink. Didn't shift. But Vico noticed something important. She adjusted her stance, just slightly. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Optimal. Marcus leaned back in his chair. If I had brought a weapon, he said, you would have taken offense. The pause. So I brought a professional instead. Silence. Heavy. The kind of silence where entire wars decide whether they're about to start. Vico realized something terrifying. This wasn't improvisation. Marcus wasn't reacting. He was executing a plan. And the worst part? It was working. The other Yalans weren't laughing anymore. Their posture had changed. Their focus sharpened. Their instincts, predatory, ruthless, ancient, were telling them something was wrong. Very wrong. Because predators recognize danger. Even when it comes in unfamiliar forms. The officer on the ground shifted slightly. Just enough to test the situation. Tessa's staff hummed, barely louder, but unmistakably ready. He froze instantly. Gorix noticed. Of course he noticed. A leader like him didn't miss details like that. Which meant he understood exactly what was happening. Not dominance. Not intimidation. Control through precision. You embarrass my officer, Gorix said. Marcus shrugged lightly. Your officer embarrassed himself. Vico almost passed out. There are moments in history where everything hinges on a single sentence. This was one of them. Because now it wasn't about territory. Or treaties. Or negotiations. Now it was about pride. Gorix took one step forward. The entire room tensed. Even the air felt tighter. You stand in front of me, he growled, and insult my command structure. Marcus didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't even glance at Tessa. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He nodded. Yes. Vico's vision tunneled. This is it. This is where we die. But Marcus wasn't done. Because if your command structure sends officers who attack during negotiations, he continued calmly, then it deserves criticism. The audacity. The absolute insanity. And yet, no one moved. Because the equation had changed. Before, the Yalans had overwhelming physical dominance. But they had uncertainty. And uncertainty is the one thing predators hate more than resistance. Stared at Marcus. Unblinking. Measuring. Slowly he leaned back. The tension didn't disappear. But it shifted. From imminent violence. To something else. Interest. You are either very brave, Gorix said, or very foolish. Marcus smiled faintly. I've found those are often the same thing. The pause. A low rumble. Not anger. Not quite. Amusement. Gorix turned slightly, gesturing toward the table. Continue, he said. Vico blinked. Twice. What? Tessa stepped back. Not fully relaxing, but easing just enough. The officer scrambled to his feet, humiliated but alive. And more importantly, silent. Marcus tapped his tablet. Excellent, he said. Now, as I was explaining, your legal claim is fundamentally flawed. And just like that, the negotiation resumed. But everything was different now. Because the illusion had shattered. Humans weren't weak. They weren't prey. They weren't harmless. They were something far more dangerous. They were unpredictable. And in a galaxy built on power hierarchies, intimidation, and predictable outcomes, that made them the most dangerous species of all. There is a very specific moment. The exact moment when a predator realizes it might not be the most dangerous thing in the room. It doesn't happen loudly. No explosions. No alarms. No dramatic music. Just a shift. Subtle. Silent. Terrifying. Vico felt it before he understood it. The air changed. Not physically, but instinctively. Every survival reflex in his body started screaming something new. Not run. Not hide. But recalculate. Because the situation had just broken every rule the galaxy lived by. A Yalan warrior. 7 feet tall. Battle-hardened. Armor-plated. Feared across entire sectors. Was on the ground. And a human, barely half his size, was holding him there. Effortlessly. Tessa didn't look strained. Didn't look rushed. Didn't even look angry. She stood there like this was routine. Like this exact scenario had already played out in her head 100 times. Her staff rested against the only vulnerable gap in the Yalan's defenses. Not random. Not lucky. Precise. That's when Vico realized something that made his stomach drop. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a last-second miracle. This was preparation. You knew. Gorix's voice cut through the silence. Controlled. Dangerous. Not a question. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He finished scrolling through his tablet. Tapped once. Then calmly looked up. We suspected, he said. One sentence. And the entire room shifted again. Vico's mind raced. Suspected? No, that wasn't right. You expected this, Gorix corrected, stepping forward. You came here knowing we would attack. Marcus gave a small shrug. Casual. Almost bored. You're an expansionist war empire facing legal defeat, he said. Statistically, aggression was the next logical step. Vico nearly collapsed. You don't say that. You don't reduce a species like the Yalans to predictable behavior. That's not diplomacy. That's suicide. But Marcus wasn't finished. So yes, he added, we planned accordingly. That word hit harder than anything else. Because suddenly, this wasn't a diplomat and his bodyguard. This was a system. A coordinated strategy. And the Yalans had just walked directly into it. Gorix's tail moved, slow, controlled, lethal. You bring a weapon into my negotiation chamber, he said. Marcus shook his head. No, he replied calmly. If I brought a weapon, you'd be offended. A slight pause. I brought a professional. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Vico felt it again. That shift. That creeping, unfamiliar sensation spreading across the room. Because predators rely on certainty. They rely on knowing they are stronger. Faster. More dangerous. And right now, that certainty was gone. The Yalan on the ground tried to move. Just slightly. Testing. Tessa didn't look at him. Didn't adjust her stance. Didn't even blink. But the staff hummed. Just a fraction louder. The message was clear. Try it. He didn't. Gorix saw that too. Of course he did. A leader like him notices everything. Which meant he understood exactly what just happened. His officer wasn't just defeated. He was controlled. You humiliate my warrior, Gorix said. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Your warrior humiliated himself, he replied. Vico stopped breathing. This is it. This is where it ends. But something unexpected happened. Nothing. No attack. No explosion. No violence. Because the equation had changed. Before this moment, the Yalans had absolute dominance. But they had uncertainty. And uncertainty is the one thing predators don't know how to fight. Gorix stepped closer. Slow. Measured. You insult my command, he growled. Marcus didn't flinch. Didn't lean back. Didn't even look at Tessa. Instead, he nodded. Yes. Vico's vision blurred. This human was insane. Completely, utterly insane. But then Marcus said something that rewrote the entire situation. Because if your command sends warriors who attack during negotiations, he said calmly, then your command has flaws. That wasn't an insult. That was a reframe. And Gorix knew it. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about control. The room held its breath. Seconds stretched. Solid. Gorix leaned back. Not surrendering. Not retreating. Reconsidering. You are either very brave, he said, or very foolish. Marcus smiled slightly. I've found those are usually the same thing. The pause. Then something incredible happened. Gorix laughed. Not mockery. Not cruelty. Genuine amusement. And just like that, the tension broke. Not gone. Never gone. But redirected. He gestured to the table. Continue. Vico blinked. Processing. Failing to process. That worked? Tessa stepped back, just enough. The Yalan officers scrambled up, silent now. Careful. Watching her. Marcus tapped his tablet again. Excellent, he said. Now, about your completely invalid territorial claim. And just like that, the negotiation resumed. But everything was different now. Because the illusion was gone. Humans weren't weak. They weren't harmless. They weren't prey. They were something far more dangerous. They planned for the moment things went wrong, and turned it into an advantage. And for the first time in a very long time, the galaxy didn't know what to do with that. The fight was over. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was this. Everyone in the room now believed something new. Not that humans were strong. Not that humans were dangerous. But that humans were unpredictable. And in a galaxy built on power, hierarchy, and intimidation. Unpredictability is power. Vico felt it immediately. The shift. Before, the Yalans controlled the room. Every movement. Every word. Every breath. But they were reacting. Marcus hadn't raised his voice. Hadn't threatened. Hadn't even stood up. And yet somehow, he was in charge. Now, Marcus said calmly, scrolling through his tablet, let's return to the matter of your territorial claim. No one interrupted him. That alone was terrifying. 5 Yalan warriors. A commander who had crushed entire systems. A species that solved problems with violence. And they were listening. Vico slowly realized something critical. This wasn't about the staff. This wasn't about Tessa's speed. This wasn't even about the takedown. That moment had only done one thing. It broke the illusion of dominance. And once that illusion was gone, everything else followed. Gorix sat down. Slowly. Deliberately. That single action echoed louder than any weapon. Predators don't sit. Not when prey is standing. But Gorix wasn't looking at prey anymore. Continue, he said. Marcus nodded once. Like this was expected. Like this had always been the outcome. Vico stared at him. How are you this calm? Marcus tapped his screen, projecting data into the center of the table. Star maps. Treaty archives. Legal frameworks. Cold. Precise. Unemotional. You're basing your claim, Marcus said, on a 6th-century-old agreement that grants limited trade access. The pause. That agreement does not transfer sovereignty. Gorix didn't respond immediately. Because now, he couldn't just dismiss it. Before he could have laughed. Threatened. Attacked. But now he had to think. Because whatever this human was, he wasn't defenseless. And that changed everything. You challenge our interpretation, Gorix said. Marcus shook his head slightly. I'm correcting it. Vico closed his eyes briefly. He's going to get us all killed. But no one moved. No one attacked. Because the fear had shifted sides. Not fear of death. But Yalans didn't fear death. But they did fear. Miscalculation. And right now, they had no idea how far this human advantage went. One bodyguard had taken down a warrior. What else were they capable of? Gorix leaned forward, claws resting on the table. And if we reject your correction? He asked. There was. This. Marcus didn't hesitate. Then we escalate. Vico's heart stopped. No. You don't escalate with Yalans. Escalation is their entire culture. But Marcus continued. Measured. Controlled. You escalate militarily, he said. We escalate strategically. Silence. What does that mean? Gorix asked. Marcus leaned back slightly. It means, he said, you win the battle and lose everything else. Now that got their attention. All 5 Yalans focused completely. Hook said. You take the colonies, Marcus continued, and what do you gain? He didn't wait for an answer. 3 planets with developing infrastructure. Limited resources. Minimal long-term value. The beat. And in exchange? He tapped the screen again. More data. More projections. Sanctions from the Council. Trade restrictions across 19 systems. Loss of access to shared jump routes. Economic isolation. Vico blinked. That actually made sense. Marcus wasn't threatening force. He was threatening consequences. And consequences? Those were harder to fight. You assume the Council has unity, Gorix said. Marcus smiled faintly. No, he said. I assume they have self-interest. Another shift. Because that was true. Painfully true. Even Vico couldn't argue with that. You think they will act against us? Gorix said. I think, Marcus replied, they will act to protect themselves. And suddenly, the war didn't look simple anymore. It looked messy, complicated, expensive. Exactly the kind of war you don't want. Gorix leaned back slightly. Thinking. Calculating. The aggression was still there. Still dangerous. But now it had something layered over it. Vico realized what Marcus was doing. He wasn't trying to overpower the Yalans. He wasn't trying to intimidate them. He was doing something far more effective. He was making war look like a bad deal. You offer alternatives? Gorix said slowly. Marcus nodded. Better ones. The pause. And what do you gain? Gorix asked. Marcus smiled. A signed agreement, he said. And a quiet day. For a second. Just a second. One of the Yalans almost laughed. The tension cracked again. Just enough. Because Marcus wasn't acting like a desperate diplomat. He wasn't begging. He wasn't pushing. He was treating this like a transaction. And that was the final shift. Not predator versus prey. Not strong versus weak. Deal versus bad deal. And in that space, humans were unbeatable. Vico exhaled slowly. He finally understood. The fight earlier? That wasn't the victory. This was. Because Tessa had proven something critical. That humans could survive the worst-case scenario. And Marcus? He was making sure they never had to reach it again. Gorix looked at his officers. Then back at Marcus. Show me your proposal, he said. Vico's breath caught. There was. Not surrender. Not defeat. But something far more powerful. Engagement. Marcus tapped his tablet again. And just like that, the humans weren't surviving the negotiation anymore. They were controlling it. Once Gorix said it, show me your proposal. The outcome was no longer uncertain. Vico didn't realize it immediately. To him, it still felt fragile. Like everything could collapse with one wrong word. One wrong tone. One wrong look. But Marcus? Marcus had already won. Because in negotiations, there is a moment, a single, critical moment, where the other side stops trying to dominate and starts trying to understand. That moment had just happened. Marcus didn't rush. That was the first thing Vico noticed. No excitement. No urgency. No visible satisfaction. Just calm. Controlled. Deliberate. He tapped his tablet. A projection filled the space above the table. Structured. Organized. Not overwhelming. Not aggressive. Professional. Here's the reality, Marcus began. Not my offer. Not your mistake. Reality. Another shift. Vico almost smiled despite himself. This human didn't argue. He reframed. You want influence in Sector 98, Marcus continued. You want economic access, strategic positioning, and recognition. Gorix didn't interrupt. Because that was exactly right. Marcus nodded slightly. Good. Then we don't actually disagree on the objective. Vico blinked. What? The Yalans had come here ready to take planets by force. And Marcus just said they agreed? That was impossible. And yet, it worked. Because suddenly, this wasn't conflict anymore. This was alignment. The disagreement, Marcus said calmly, is about method. He tapped again. The projection shifted. Two paths appeared. Path 1, conquest. Immediate military victory. High resource expenditure. Long-term occupation costs. Political backlash. Economic isolation. Path 2, agreement. Guaranteed trade access. Recognized economic presence. Council-backed legitimacy. Zero military loss. Long-term stability. Vico stared at it. It was so simple. So obvious. And yet somehow, no one had presented it like this before. Because most species argued. Humans? They simplified. Gorix's eyes moved across the projection. Slow. Focused. You assume we fear cost, he said. Marcus shook his head slightly. No, he replied. I assume you value efficiency. That landed. Vico saw it. The micro-reaction. The shift in posture. Because that wasn't an insult. That was respect. Not fear. Not submission. Respect. You believe we will choose the easier path, Gorix said. Marcus leaned forward slightly. I believe, he said, you will choose the smarter one. Silence. And in that silence, something critical happened. The Yalans stopped thinking like conquerors. And started thinking like decision-makers. Vico felt it. Clear as gravity. This was no longer about pride. This was about outcome. Marcus tapped the screen again. Let's talk specifics. Now came the real work. Trade routes. Resource sharing. Tariff adjustments. Numbers. Tools. Structure. Vico found himself stepping in automatically. Providing data. Cross-referencing agreements. Supporting projections. And that's when he realized something else. Marcus wasn't just controlling the Yalans. He was controlling the entire room. Everyone moved in rhythm with him. Even Vico. Especially Vico. Tessa stood behind him. Silent. Still. Watching everything. And somehow, her presence made the entire negotiation stronger. Not because she was threatening, but because she didn't need to be anymore. The message had already been delivered. We can fight. Now Marcus was delivering the second message. But we don't need to. Time passed. Minutes. Then an hour. The tension never fully disappeared. But it changed form. From danger to focus. Gorix pushed back on percentages. Marcus adjusted. The Yalans demanded stronger trade guarantees. Marcus restructured the deal. Every time resistance appeared, Marcus didn't fight it. He absorbed it. Redirected it. Turned it into something usable. Vico had never seen anything like it. No aggression. No desperation. Precision. Eventually, the conversation slowed. Not because it was failing, but because it was ending. Gorix leaned back, studying Marcus. Then Tessa. Then the projection. You came here expecting violence, he said. Marcus nodded once. And yet you built a solution for peace. Marcus's expression didn't change. Violence is easy, he said. Solutions take effort. Another pause. Gorix gave a slow, deliberate nod. We will withdraw our fleet. Vico froze. Just like that? No final threat. No last test. Agreement. The colonies will open trade channels, Gorix continued. Under your proposed terms. Marcus tapped his tablet. Already finalizing. Already prepared. Agreed. And that was it. No celebration. No dramatic moment. Done. A war that could have consumed entire sectors. Ended in a conversation. Vico sat there, stunned. Trying to process what he had just witnessed. This shouldn't have worked. By every known model of galactic behavior, this should have failed. But it didn't. Because humans didn't follow the model. They rewrote it. As they prepared to leave, Gorix stepped forward one last time. "Human," he said. Marcus looked up. "You are not what we expected." A small smile. "We get that a lot." Gorix's gaze shifted to Tessa. "And her?" The pause. "She is dangerous." Marcus nodded casually. "Yes." Another pause. Then Gorix said something that would echo far beyond that room. "We will remember that." And for the first time since this began, Vico believed him. Because this wasn't just a negotiation. This was a message. And the entire galaxy was about to hear it. The negotiation ended quietly. No explosions. No dramatic exits. No final threats echoing through the station. Just signatures. Data transfers. A formal agreement logged into the council system. And yet, what happened in that room didn't stay in that room. Because in galactic politics, information travels faster than light. Vico didn't notice it at first. Not immediately. He was too busy trying to recover. Too busy convincing his body that it was no longer in immediate danger. Too busy processing the fact that, against all logic, they were alive. The transport doors sealed behind them with a soft hiss. And for the first time in hours, there was silence. Real silence. Vico collapsed into the nearest seat. "That," he said weakly, "was not supposed to work." Marcus didn't look up from his tablet. "It usually does," he replied casually. "Usually." Vico let out a slow, disbelieving breath. Across from him, Tessa was already back to her routine. Disassembling her weapon. Cleaning each piece with precise, almost meditative focus. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just taken down a Yalan warrior in seconds. And helped prevent a war. "You're both insane," Vico muttered. Tessa glanced up briefly. A faint smirk. "You keep saying that," she said. "Because it keeps being true." Marcus chuckled softly. "Insane is just another word for effective," he said. Vico stared at him. That wasn't it. This wasn't just effectiveness. This was something else. Something the galaxy didn't have a framework for. And that's when the first alert came in. Vico's data pad lit up. Then again. Then again. Incoming messages. Priority flags. Council pings. Dozens. "What now?" Vico groaned, opening the first one. He froze. Then slowly looked up. "They know." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Know what?" Vico swallowed. "Everything." Because the report had already spread. Not just the outcome, but the details. A human diplomat dismantling a territorial claim in seconds. A human bodyguard taking down a Yalan warrior in under 3. A negotiation that should have ended in blood. Ending in a signed agreement. Vico scrolled through the messages. Each one more urgent than the last. Council members requesting briefings. Military divisions asking for analysis. Trade sectors requesting clarification on new agreements. And underneath all of it, one consistent thread. Confusion. How did this happen? That shouldn't be possible. Humans aren't capable of this. Vico looked at Marcus again. "They're questioning everything," he said. Marcus finally set his tablet down. "Good." Vico blinked. "Good." Marcus leaned back slightly. "People only start paying attention when their assumptions break," he said. Tessa nodded faintly without looking up. "And we just broke a lot of them." That was an understatement. Because this wasn't just a successful negotiation. This was a paradigm shift. For decades, humans had been categorized. Fragile. Persistent. Harmless. A curiosity. Now they were something else entirely. Vico scrolled further. Reports from other sectors were already reacting. Species that had dismissed humans were re-evaluating. Species that had ignored them were requesting meetings. Species that had underestimated them were suddenly very, very cautious. "There are already rumors," Vico said slowly. Marcus smiled slightly. "There are always rumors." Vico shook his head. "No, you don't understand." He turned the datapad around. Some of them think Tessa killed all 5 Yalans. Tessa paused mid-motion. I didn't. I know that, Vico said quickly. But that's not the point. Because rumors didn't need to be true. They just needed to be believable. And after what happened? Anything involving humans suddenly was. Marcus considered that for a moment. Then shrugged lightly. Let them talk. Vico stared at him. You're not concerned? Marcus shook his head. No, he said. Reputation is a tool. Tessa smirked slightly. And right now. Marcus's eyes flickered with quiet confidence. It's working for us. Vico leaned back in his seat, trying to absorb everything. Because he was starting to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about one negotiation. This was about positioning, influence, perception. Humans hadn't just ended a conflict. They had changed how the galaxy saw them. And in politics? That mattered more than fleets. The transport hummed softly as it moved through space. For a moment, everything was calm. Then Vico's datapad flashed again. Different signal this time. Priority emergency. Vico's stomach dropped. Red was never good. He opened the channel. The face that appeared was tense, focused, urgent. Vico, the voice said. We have a situation. Of course they did. Vico closed his eyes briefly. Define situation, he muttered. The response came instantly. Multi-species warfleet. Rapid escalation. Potential sector-wide conflict. Vico slowly turned his head toward Marcus. Marcus was already smiling. Not nervously. Not uncertainly. Excited. Another one, he said. Tessa snapped her weapon shut and stood. Sounds like it. Vico stared at both of them. You can't be serious. Marcus stood up, straightening his jacket. Vico, he said calmly. This is what we do. And that's when Vico realized something that made everything click into place. The Yalan negotiation wasn't the peak. It wasn't the climax. It wasn't even the real test. The second crisis was bigger. Much bigger. The kind of problem that didn't get solved with clever wording alone. The kind of problem that swallowed entire systems. Vico knew at the moment they entered the war room. No one was arguing. No one was posturing. No one was pretending this could be handled easily. That alone told him everything. Because the Galactic Council always argued. But not this time. They were afraid. At the center of the room, a massive holographic projection pulsed in deep red. Fleet signatures. Hundreds of them. Multiple species. All converging on a single region of space. A storm. And at its center, one name. The Draxan hegemony. Vico felt his throat tighten. Tell me we're not doing what I think we're doing, he muttered. Marcus stepped forward calmly. We're negotiating, he said. Vico let out a hollow laugh. With that, he gestured at the war map. That's not a negotiation. That's an extinction event waiting to happen.
Tessa stood beside Marcus, already scanning exits, angles, people. Always calculating. Everything is a negotiation, Marcus replied. Vico shook his head. No. Not this. You can't talk down something like that. Marcus turned slightly, his expression unreadable. Watch me. The meeting. The neutral ground was worse this time. An abandoned mining facility. Cold. Silent. Dead. The kind of place built for extraction, not diplomacy. Vico's instincts screamed the entire time. This wasn't a discussion. This was a test. And the one waiting for them was not Gorix. It was something else entirely. War Master Threx. He was massive. 9 feet of muscle, armor, scars, and something colder. Experience. This wasn't a brute. This was a survivor of 100 wars. And he looked at them. The same way predators always did. Like prey. The council sends this? Threx's voice rumbled. A clerk and 2 animals. Vico almost corrected him. Almost. Marcus didn't. He stepped forward instead. Ambassador Marcus Vale, he said calmly. Shall we begin? No hesitation. No fear. Just presence. And somehow, that mattered. The failure. Marcus did everything right. Vico knew that. He broke down the logic. He offered alternatives. He gave Threx something better than war. Recognition. Expansion. Power without cost. It was perfect. It should have worked. But it didn't. Because Threx didn't want logic. He wanted dominance. I do not negotiate with prey, Threx said. And just like that, everything fell apart. Vico felt it immediately. This was the end. No clever argument. No diplomatic trick. This was where it all collapsed. Marcus went still. Not panicked. Not desperate. Thinking. Calculating. And then, Tessa stepped forward. The turning point. One question, she said. The entire room shifted, because her voice didn't carry fear. It carried certainty. Threx turned.
What?
Tessa met his gaze. Have you ever fought a human? Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Vico's heart started pounding.
No.
No. This was a mistake. But Tessa didn't stop. You call us prey, she continued. You act like we're beneath you. One step forward. Is that based on experience or assumption? The room froze. Because this wasn't negotiation anymore. This was something older. Something deeper. Challenge. Threx's eyes narrowed. You dare? Tessa didn't flinch. I dare to prove you wrong. Vico whispered under his breath. We're all going to die. But Marcus? Marcus didn't stop her. He trusted her. And somehow, that was more terrifying than anything else. The fight. It shouldn't have been a fight. It should have been an execution. Threx was bigger, stronger, faster than anything that size had a right to be. And Tessa? Human. Small. Fragile. At least, that's what everyone thought. The timer started. Threx moved first. A killing strike. Tessa wasn't there. She moved like water. Precise. Controlled. Every motion had purpose. She didn't fight his strength. She avoided it. Redirected it. Used it. Vico couldn't follow half of what happened. But he saw the result. Threx stumbling. Bleeding. Slowing. Impossible. This wasn't supposed to happen. 2 minutes in, both were injured. But only one was adapting. Only one was learning. Tessa. Because that's what humans did. They learned. They adjusted. They kept going. Final seconds. Threx was still standing. But barely. Tessa moved. Not faster. Smarter. She found the opening. Took it. Locked it in. And suddenly, the unstoppable war master was on the ground. Defeated. Silence. Total silence. Vico realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about winning. This was about rewriting reality. The shift. Threx stood slowly. Not angry. Not humiliated. Something else. Respect. You are not prey, he said. 3 simple words. But they echoed louder than any weapon. Because they changed everything. Marcus stepped forward. So, he said lightly, do we have a deal? Threx looked at him. Then at Tessa. Then at his warriors. And finally, he laughed. Not mockery. Approval. Yes. Just one word. But it carried the weight of fleets. Of war. Of history. The resolution. The fleets stood down. The war never started. Millions lived. Because 2 humans walked into a room. And refused to lose. Not because they were stronger. But because they were different. Marcus won with words. Tessa won with action. And together, they did something no one thought possible. They changed the outcome before the first shot was fired. The final realization. Back on the transport, Vico sat in silence, watching them, trying to understand. You didn't know you could win, he said to Tessa. She shook her head. No. Vico blinked. Then why risk it? Tessa smiled faintly. Because not trying guarantees you lose. Marcus added without looking up. And humans don't like guaranteed losses. Vico leaned back slowly. And finally, after everything, it clicked. Humans weren't the strongest. They weren't the fastest. They weren't the most advanced. But they had something else. Something far more dangerous. They refused to accept defeat. Even when defeat was the logical outcome. And that made them unpredictable. Creative. Relentless.
Terrifying.
Vico looked out at the stars, at the vast, dangerous galaxy, and for the first time, he felt something unexpected, not fear, relief. Because humanity was no longer knocking on the door of galactic politics. They were inside, and they weren't leaving. Final line, viral hook ending. Humans looked at impossible odds, looked at certain defeat, and instead of surrendering, they asked one simple question. What if we win anyway?